Yo. So this talk is also a little experimental if you're here for Malta's talk. This one's a bit in a different direction. Instead of very, very few slides, there are quite a lot of them. But we'll go through them. Now, all you need is love. I suppose maybe a subtitle might help put it into context. I'm talking about why the future of building software is in the heart and not, as you may have thought, in the head. I should start off with a brief disclaimer. While I work at Sechs Wunderkinder, these are not necessarily representative of the views of Sechs Wunderkinder. Void where prohibited, some restrictions may apply, all that stuff. It may be a little bit rambly, and also it's not a blueprint. If you were building like air traffic control systems or life support or something, like maybe this isn't necessarily a blueprint for your organization. But it is sort of thinking about how to build new things. So think about it as not software development for dinosaurs, but for mammals. Okay? A bit about me. I'm Agnoster on Twitter and GitHub and Facebook and pretty much everywhere else. Some people sometimes call me Isaac. I work at Sechs Wunderkinder. I also study machine learning at the TU Berlin. And I've been madly in love with building software since I was 8. Those of you who are here for Malta's talk, actually, he saved me the whole business of having to get into like, oh, this is how I fell in love with programming. Now you know why people fall in love with programming. Although on a very small side note, when I did start programming, I think part of the reason that it drew me so much was that it felt magical. In one word. And I don't mean that just in the sense of inspiring awe and wonder, which it did, but in the sense that if you read books about like wizards casting spells with like just the right words and maybe some arcane symbols, like that's exactly what programming actually is, especially when you come to it as a child. Okay, so that's a bit about me. This is a bit about you. So I imagine that half of you are going to think that the stuff I'm about to talk about is crazy. And the other half are going to be like, yeah, that's pretty obvious, right? Doesn't everyone know this? I'm not sure exactly what the proportion is going to be, so I just guessed it at 50-50. So I mentioned some people may think this is sort of a rehash of Hackers and Painters. Just by a show of hands, who has read Hackers and Painters by Paul Graham? OK, all right. Well, perfect. That's excellent. It's an essay by Paul Graham, who you may know from Y Combinator fame and sold startup to Yahoo many, many years ago, and has since been sort of writing essays interminably about startups and technology and that sort of thing. Hackers and Painters was an attempt to draw an extended metaphor about how programming is really sort of like painting. It has this sort of artistic, creative aspect to it, and that's why, hey, you should think we're cool, just like painters, right? Now, it really could have been hackers and blank, like any creative endeavor. It could have been hackers and architects, hackers and musicians, perhaps. But the point is that he made the claim, which I'm going to put out there, that programming is fundamentally a creative process. Okay, and now what do we mean by creative? I'm putting that in juxtaposition to methodical. Okay, so something that's a methodical process is something where you can reproduce a specific set of steps and then you reproduce the same end. So if you're going to build a guitar or something, you can follow a specific set of steps and build that guitar. If you're going to drink a glass of water, you can follow a specific set of steps. Just pick up bottle, pick up glass, pour water from bottle into glass, lift the glass up. Right? And that's pretty easy. Anyone can do it. If you follow the steps of a method without making any mistakes, then you always get the same result. Right? I now have my thirst quenched. A creative process, on the other hand, involves heuristics, involves things where the outcome is not clear, and we don't know how to get from A to B. And one of the typical ways that people think about this dichotomy is in a sort of left brain, right brain way. This is an ad by Mercedes-Benz. I guess this helped sell cars somehow. But they actually show on the left brain hacking, on the right brain painting, which is perfect, right? I would actually sort of take issue with that. Hacking, building software, is not purely a left brain activity. The left brain is actually the part of our brain that functions more like a computer. But it's not the part that functions like a programmer of a computer, right? Someone has to know why we're building the things we're building. Someone has to say how we're going to build the things that we're going to build. It's not a repetitive thing. Building software is creative. And so I wanted to talk about how emotion is important here. And the reason that emotion is important is because it's what guides us to creative solutions. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, I hope a lot of you are familiar with Le Petit Prince, the seminal work. And he said, here's my secret. It is very simple. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. So what we perceive on the surface of things is not their true nature. And anyone who has to do anything remotely creative has to understand that the surface level does not tell you the whole story. You have to look deeper, and to look deeper, you have to look with your heart. Now, that's not how geeks are trained, right? We think in terms of, maybe you have the idea of like geeks picking out the little, oh, yes, in this Star Trek episode, actually, it would have been impossible to calibrate the dilithium crystals. With a at the end. And we have this idea of like being technically correct. That's the best kind of correct, right? Like, because then no one can argue with you. If you're technically right, well, I showed it with logic. It doesn't really matter what you feel, right? Logic's on my side. I won the argument. And part of it is also that talking about emotions, and especially talking about love, is weird and kind of scary and a little uncomfortable, and that's actually sort of why I picked it, because I wanted to push myself out of my comfort zone, maybe push you a little bit out of your comfort zone too, and make you think about why is it scary to talk about love? Why does it feel weird to talk about love in a professional context? And especially for geeks, part of the reason for that is that all of the tools that we have for dissecting problems fail when it comes to love, right? All the things about rationally breaking something down, well, mathematics and love and beauty, they just don't go together, right? Well, is that exactly true? I could have picked about 5 million Einstein quotes about, how intuition is more important than intelligence and creativity is more important than blah, 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 and all this stuff, because he has a bunch of them. But for me, this one expressed it really well, that when someone came to him with a solution, he'd look at it and say, oh, that's ugly. And that, for him, was sufficient to dismiss it. If the solution was ugly, then it couldn't be right. Now, obviously, we're not all Einstein, so maybe he had a much more highly developed sense of aesthetics that was correct when it came to, theoretical physics. But the fact of the matter is that aesthetics and our judgment of sort of what is beautiful is actually just a kind of heuristic that our brain applies to figure out whether something is well-formed and well-suited for a problem. The part of our brain that is able to assess whether something is beautiful is doing hundreds, maybe thousands of calculations in parallel, whereas the logical part of our brain sort of has to go through step by step, maybe make a list of pros and cons and then weight them and this sort of thing, whereas our idea of what's beautiful can be assessed sometimes in an instant, right? Love at first sight. Another way of putting that would be, of course, perhaps one of the famous passages from English literature, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. So we shouldn't necessarily believe that only the logical ways of arriving at truth are valid, even when it comes to things like theoretical physics or mathematics or, indeed, programming. A sort of side note, but you'll see how it becomes relevant later on, is that builders of software, which we sort of say like software developers or programmers or something like that, they have to be more than just coders. Or some people might say they have to be more than code monkeys, right? Code monkey being someone you tell them, implement this, and then, okay, and they crank out some code, and then, okay, it works. Maybe it doesn't. And this division of labor in society, kicked off with the agricultural revolution and then sort of crescendoed in the industrial revolution. Now there's specializations for every type of little thing that you can do. And the thing is that we don't want just, in German we would say Fachidioten, right? We don't want someone who only knows this one tiny little narrow sliver of stuff and doesn't know anything outside. In fact, as far back as Adam Smith, who's widely regarded as one of the founding fathers of free market capitalism, and first really expressed the value of division of labor in society from a political economic standpoint, also pointed out the danger of mental mutilation to the worker, as he put it. That if you spend your whole life performing a simple set of operations, that you generally become stultified and stupid, because you're no longer able to look out beyond what's directly in front of you. You're like a horse with blinders on. And we do not need that in software development, not one bit, right? What software looks like now is actually very much, as Alan Kay puts here, he says that most software today is very much like an Egyptian pyramid built by slave labor and brute force, just piling things on top and on top of shoddy software without necessarily seeing the bigger picture. The bigger picture seers, the great programmers, I think everyone knows at this point that a great programmer is worth at least an order of magnitude more than merely a competent programmer. That's almost, I think that's accepted common wisdom at this point. But the question is, how do you get the best programmers? Now, part of it is maybe innate talent. Part of it is, maybe their education or their level of experience. But there's another important aspect. And I would claim that is, again, love. People do their best work for love. It inspires them. It makes them rise above the everyday. That's why Daniel Hudson Burnham said, "Make no little plans, they have no magic to stir men's blood." That's the famous part of the quote, but he actually goes on, and probably themselves will not be realized. If you actually make little plans, like, have you ever noticed how programmers might tend to procrastinate on something really trivial and minor and unimportant, and like, yeah, it would only take a minute, but it's so dumb. Like, that sort of aversion, that sort of lack of inspiration, that can be deadly when you have a creative process to do. And so we have to fight this sort of alienation of labor, as Adam Smith, sort of spiritual descendant in some ways, but not others, Karl Marx would have put it, or estranged labor. And the way I think we need to do that is actually by recognizing that fun is not the enemy of work. A lot of sort of newer developments, new technologies, they often look like toys, right, before they suddenly become world-changing. And in a similar way, work, I think the work of the future looks a lot more like play than it looks like what we associate with work today. Part of the reason for that is that creativity is increasingly important in almost every sphere of economics. If you're not familiar with the work of Teresa Amabile in terms of managing creativity and that sort of thing, even if you disagree with everything else I say in this talk, if you care about creativity, she has some really great ideas about how you can manage creativity within a more traditional framework. And part of that is that nothing kills innovation faster than trying to work with carrots and sticks, trying to work with what she calls extrinsic motivation. So when you try and motivate programmers by offering them bonuses, or worse yet, threaten them, it kills their creativity like stone dead. What actually motivates people to be creative is a love of the task itself, in and of itself. The satisfaction of a job well done, that's what has to motivate them. So you can't pay someone to care about what they're doing. Just the same way that you can't pay someone to fall in love. You can maybe pay someone to pretend to be in love, but we all know that's really not the same thing. So I believe we have to move from this sort of old paradigm of economics that was based on producing goods from scarce resources using fungible labor where each worker is essentially the same. Essentially, we're trying to wring the most out of people, to instead a model where value in the economy is created by innovation and creativity. So what that means is we want to bring out the best in people. We want people to be the absolute best and most creative that they possibly can. And the way you do that, and this is funny, as I was looking, I jumped over to Twitter while I was writing these slides to grab that picture of the postcard with "Fun is not the enemy of work." And sitting right at the top of my Twitter feed were 2 tweets from Isaac Schluter, totally different Isaac, who spoke at Next last year on Node.js. Right at the top of my Twitter feed, sitting there, "Work is generally either self-motivated or total shit. People don't do things well when they're not feeling it." I couldn't have put it better myself. And interestingly enough, right before that, because he was talking, I presume, about NPM or Node.js, he said, when managing a team of volunteers, you have to build delays and downtime into deadlines. In return, you get much higher quality work. So what we should actually be doing is we should be thinking of employees not as like lieutenants or foot soldiers that sort of carry out orders from the top, right? But instead, think of them as volunteers. The reason that they are getting paid money is so that they don't have to go and waste their time doing something else, but so that they can volunteer to do what their heart leads them to do, which is working on the same project as you. Now, to some of you, you might be thinking, okay, so basically everyone just gets to do whatever they want to do, and there's no central control. This is chaos. This is madness. Madness? This is startup. This is actually something that is being done already at not all companies, but some companies are giving their workers tremendous freedom. If you have not read the Valve Handbook for New Employees, it's a real eye-opener, I think. And they talk about how it's very disorienting when people first come to Valve. For the first 6 months, they just have to adjust to the idea of, wait, no one's going to tell me what to do? I don't know how to deal with freedom. It's sort of like an animal that's been raised in captivity, being released into the wild. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that freedom? Also, fantastic, the How GitHub Works slides by Zach Coleman, who's a personal hero of mine, talks about how GitHub works and actually gets, people work on what they think should be worked on. And amazingly enough, if you have something that gets people to fall in love with it, that works. So the future of work, I believe, is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. There are only a few companies that are sort of really pushing the boundaries of what can be done in this way. But I think that it is the shape of things to come. And I think that sort of love-driven development, if you will, is going to be a huge force, not just in programming. I think programming is where you'll see it first, but really in anything that's creative. And I think that more and more creative endeavors, especially software, is eating the rest of the economy. So I don't really have time to go into all of the aspects of what love-driven development would entail, but I do want to talk very quickly about the first sort of quote that came to mind when I thought, oh, I know, I'm going to do a talk about love, was a quote from, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Serenity. Okay, not many, but at any rate, the captain of the spaceship, yeah, it's science fiction, but it's great, in the very last scene is talking about what the first rule of flying is. And he says, you know what the first rule of flying is? Love. Love keeps her in the air when she ought to fall down. And that's actually true not because, love is supernatural and it keeps the thing flying or whatever, but it's because if you've ever worked on a team of people who really love what they're doing, they think about everything, every little detail, every little thing that could possibly go wrong, they will know about before the QA finds it or anything else. They will figure it out. And so the point I guess I'm trying to get across is that amor vincit omnia. Love conquers all. Again, not for any mystical or supernatural reasons, but because it's the most powerful, inspiring force for us. And so when we love the project we're working on, when we love the team we're working with, when we love the customers that we're building it for, when we love what we're doing every day, it brings out the best in us, and then we can conquer all. Thanks for listening.